So the first question that we'd have for you is, your party's advocating a yes vote in the upcoming referendum, and we're wondering for our audience, what impact do you feel a yes vote will have for 16 to 25-year-old young people?
Specifically, what a yes vote will have for young people between that age is essentially to ensure that in 2014 and 2015 we have access to funding to pay for public services and education in particular, health and other areas. So for young people who are at school, for example, it's to ensure that we keep our schools going, that we have the salaries to pay the teachers, that we have resources to pump into the schools. Notwithstanding all the cuts that have occurred, the bottom line is we need about 18 billion in 2014, 10 billion to cover the deficit, that is the gap between what we raise in taxes and what we spend on services, and 8 billion to repay a maturing loan. Now we either get that money from the markets or we get it through the new European Stability Mechanism Fund. The markets, we may be able to get it there, we may not. But the Stability Fund, we can and definitely will get access to that if we vote yes. That's a practical outcome of the yes vote. More generally for young people, the set of rules that we're signing up to in this treaty, and we're asking every member state, or we're being asked to sign up to, will basically give confidence to the euro currency and will underpin external investment and confidence in Europe and in Ireland. That's a good thing for jobs, ultimately. It's a general point, but it's a very important point. Confidence in the euro means that young people in school today, or young people who might be unemployed now, or indeed young people in work, their chances are improved if we can take measures that increase confidence in Europe generally and in Ireland. Now, it's only one step. It's not the be-all and end-all of everything, and it's not going to solve all our problems, but we do think it's an important step in the right direction. We agree with a common set of rules that were agreed before, and we definitely agree with the idea of having access, definite access, to funding at cost in 2014 to 2015.
Do you think that young people, so under the legal age to vote, so we're talking for us between 16 and 18, should be consulted in relation to long-term constitutional amendments that potentially have a long-term impact on their lives?
Yes, I think that's a very good idea. We would have to devise the mechanisms for doing that, but after all, we have Dáil and Oak, we have established national parliaments for young people under the age of voting age, and therefore I think that's an interesting concept. It's not something we have done before, but I do think it's a very good idea, and there are mechanisms we can use to consult and also to inform people about changes that will have a long-term impact on people's lives.
And do you think that's a realistic thing that decision makers take into account? You know, say for example, if politicians are looking ahead to develop a constitutional amendment, do you think that they're considering that 16 to 18, you know, or those young people in those decisions that they're making at kind of?
They are actually. I mean, it's arguable the reason we want funding in 2014 and to make sure we have definite access is to look after young people in schools, young people who will need access to hospitals. We want to build a new National Children's Hospital in this country. We do need to be fairly certain that in 2014, 2015 and 2016 we actually have access to money to enable us to do all of those things. So that's as practical illustration as you can get about how people are thinking about the next generation. And every door I canvass on and every person I meet, actually what's number one on the agenda of most mothers I meet in particular is prospects for their young people. Either jobs, when they come out of college or out of school, and the future generally of the country.
Okay. One final general question then for you is, many young people have said that they're not sure how to vote. I suppose that's the nature of referendum. They bring up yes and no side arguments. But what do you feel that you yourself and your party colleagues can do as decision makers to make sure that they feel engaged and informed?
I think the most important thing we can do is to go out and meet as many people as we possibly can to communicate the message that a yes vote is important. And in addition to ensure that more information is provided to people through leaflets, through media, and we are doing that. And I do regret that the government didn't move earlier in terms of providing more comprehensive information about the treaty. It has now been sent, I think, to every household in the country. But there's an ongoing need to be on discussion panels, to go to various fora where young people are gathered and to explain the treaty and to hear what people have to say and to listen to what people have to say and to respond to the issues that they raise.
And just as a kind of follow-on from that as well, you know, traditionally that young people don't vote as often in the referendum. Do you think there's anything that we can do as a society to change that, or is there anything that we could look at kind of address that, to bring them more people into voting in those kind of high level decisions that we need to make?
I think clearly we could do more to increase interest and activism among young people in terms of referendums in particular. Although I do recall in terms of the Lisbon referendum, the first Lisbon referendum, it was actually a majority of young people actually voted against it, and that were the significant age group in terms of the defeat of that referendum. That was transformed in the second referendum, and that was, I think, in large measure due to the fact that people on the yes side took a more active role in terms of engaging with young people. So Generation X were formed, who were a young group. So young people were talking to young people, and there was a debate facilitated between young people on the merits or demerits of the European Treaty. And I think that's it's an interesting model actually, and we probably should go back and look at how young people were engaged in that particular debate as a model for future referendum and indeed future political activity.
John asked why weren't these sorts of controls, so what he's referring to as the Fiscal Treaty, introduced when the euro was first introduced. John goes on to say that surely it was madness to introduce a single currency across separate economies without any sort of federal economic control. So,
well, actually they were introduced under the Maastricht Treaty and a thing called the Stability and Growth Pact, but the problem was they weren't properly originally enforced. So Germany and France actually broke these rules in 2005, and those two big countries were the first to do so. Ireland actually didn't break those rules until the collapse itself happened in 2008. We actually, and it's an important point, because the treaty itself won't solve all problems and wouldn't actually have prevented the crisis. But it is necessary that all countries agree a basic set of rules to underpin confidence in a currency. And John, he's right there when he makes that point, that a basic set of rules are required. And it's also fair to say that the design of the euro was flawed from the outset. And that's one of the fundamental underlying causes of the current collapse that we are experiencing across Europe, was the flawed design of the euro, to be frank about that. But now we have to correct those flaws, and I think there's more needs to be done, not just this treaty. I would change the mandate of the central bank, not just focused on inflation alone, but have a growth agenda. I would change in terms of the wider issues to do with the European Investment Bank, to do with the European budget itself in terms of having the capacity to spend more. I think the firewall, as it's called, or the amount of money that is set aside, the Stability Mechanism Fund, I would increase that to give real confidence to the currency. And we've been calling for these measures for quite some time.
Just to follow on that from that, when you talk about the ESM, and it's set at about 700 billion currently. One of the questions we had from Jimmy, who tweeted us, was where are the billions of euros going to come from Ireland to pay into the ESM? And he goes on to say, if from the countries themselves, so he reckons that we're broke, so how can we pay into this ESM if we're broke already?
Well, it's a per capita basis. In other words, each country pays in accordance to its GDP, its gross its output basically as an economy. Now some countries will end up borrowing some of that to put into the pot. Like in Ireland's situation, we will make a contribution, which we deal with in our annual budgets. And our annual budget has a taxation, has expenditure, and has borrowing to meet the difference between the two. And that's we've already done this with the EFSF. That's this temporary stability mechanism, and what is proposed here is to make it permanent. And some countries are wealthier than others, and some countries will contribute far more.
We have about 1.59%.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. And countries like Germany, Holland, and others will be making significant contributions. And it is reasonable for them to say, okay, we are making significant contributions here. At the very minimum we require is that we all sign up to a common basic set of rules. And we would accept that. I think that's proportionate and that's reasonable. But equally we would say it needs another side to it as well, which is a growth agenda. And we need to make sure we have investment and growth in order to pay for this and in order for Europe to come out of the crisis.
Okay. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more as well, that growth agenda, Martin, that you're talking about, just to maybe explain to some of our audience as well what that might entail?
Well, I think there's a number of proposals on the table. The more immediate ones we could do would be the European Investment Bank could, in our view, be used to invest in shovel-ready projects, as they're called. These are infrastructural projects that are ready to go, that would have an immediate kick in the economy in terms of job creation, but also improving the long-term productive capacity of the economy. So basically, if you build schools, or if you build roads or rail or projects like that, you actually help the economy become more efficient over time. So investment in research and innovation is equally important in that regard. Broadband capacity, those kind of areas. Now you'd have to identify the sectors, but I think the European Investment Bank could be used much more aggressively to fund projects like that. There are quite a significant number of countries that haven't used their structural funds at all. These are funds that Europe provides for infrastructure. They haven't been used in some countries. They should be reallocated immediately, in our view, to projects that are ready to go. Thirdly, and would probably need another treaty, would be to broaden the mandate of the European Central Bank, which could, in the first instance, at the moment its remit is to make sure it controls inflation. That's its focus, singular focus, when the euro was set up. We would argue that it needs to have a twin focus, both inflation and growth. And basically that means that it's in a position to do what the Federal Reserve has done in America and the Bank of England in terms of supporting the currency, but also ensuring liquidity to our banking system, and also being the lender of last resort to sovereign countries to protect the Eurozone and protect the Euro itself. And
one last question for you then comes from Jack, who's one of our SpunOut volunteers. And Jack was a little bit sceptical. He's noticed that a lot of people who employ, so the likes of IBEC, those big employers, confederations and organisations, are asking people to vote yes. And he's wondering, is there a negative to this, or is the reason why that these big employment organisations are looking for a yes vote from people?
I don't see a negative to it. I mean, by the way, small employers are equally looking for a yes vote. And I think it's a fundamental question to ask yourself, why? It's because they would see a no vote as anti-jobs. And a no vote would undermine confidence in the country. So you take the multinationals, for example, like the CEOs in Ireland, and they know what they're competing with other sites around the world. So you take Apple, you take pharmaceutical Allergan, or you take Eli Lilly. The parent company can decide to locate additional investment in a number of locations around the world. A no vote in Ireland sort of creates a question mark in the corporate headquarters of these companies. Is Ireland a safe bet? Is it going down the right road? Should we invest our next plant there, or our next activity there, or should we go to Singapore? Should we go to Switzerland? Should we go to Puerto Rico? And these are companies that pharmaceuticals make on a medium-term basis. So the CEOs here in Ireland are very clear that a yes vote will help in terms of the kind of corporate decisions that companies make when they're expanding. So Apple recently did 500 jobs in Cork. One needs to be extremely careful that we don't take decisions that would result in Apple going elsewhere for further investments, as opposed to coming to Cork, or PayPal in Dundalk, or companies like Allergan and those around the world. Smaller based companies and Irish owned companies export. So for example, Germany would be our biggest market for pork. So Germany buys more pork from Ireland than any other country in the world. I think it's important that we would clearly illustrate to the German society that we're serious about what we're about, that we're on a pathway out of the crisis, difficult and all as it is. France buys more of our seafood than any other country in the world. So our small companies in agriculture and food export to all of these countries. And that is why they're looking for a yes vote, because they want to keep the confidence in the country growing. They want to underpin the sense of Ireland correcting itself, dealing with the worst crisis since 1929 in Europe and the world, but doing it in a very deliberate, organised, structured way, and a certain way. And no vote is uncertain. We just don't know, for example, if we won't know, where do we get the money in 214 that I spoke about earlier? What happens if we vote no, in terms of access to that money? Does it create a further ripple of uncertainty across Europe? People are very nervous at the moment in Europe. Greece situation, Spain, Italy. Why should we add to that uncertainty in Ireland? These are that's why the employers would be very much for a yes vote, both small and big.